You're watching This Week in Louisiana Politics with Fred Childers.
Good Sunday morning to you. I'm Fred Childers. Thanks for joining us for This Week in Louisiana Politics on your local election headquarters. On Thursday, Governor John Bel Edwards met with President Donald Trump to discuss Louisiana's criminal justice overhaul. The reforms helped Louisiana shed its title as the nation's lockup capital. But in the year since those changes took effect, time has not silenced the governor's Republican rivals, as Harrison Golden explains.
Of the nearly 2,000 offenders released November 1st, state corrections officials say 232 have been rearrested, either for violating the terms of their release or allegedly committing new crimes. District attorneys in the state claim the number of recidivists could be almost double that.
Some folks in this world, I don't know why it is, but they're not sick, they're not confused, they're not mixed up. It's not a question that their mama didn't love them enough. They're just bad people.
Both Senator John Kennedy and Attorney General Jeff Landry have been among the most vocal critics of the reinvestment package. The bills received bipartisan support in the state legislature, though Kennedy is footing many of his frustrations toward the governor, claiming at least 2 of the rearrested inmates are in custody for murder.
Well, I believe in second chances, but he thinks these prisoners are, I don't know what he thinks they're in prison for. It's not for skipping Sunday school, I can assure you.
But Corrections Secretary Jimmy LeBlanc firing back this week, quote, Senator Kennedy clearly does not understand how offenders' time and release are calculated. And he adds that many of the kinks lie at the front end. He's accusing DAs of pleading defendants down to lesser nonviolent offenses in order to get higher conviction rates. Quote, if they do choose this method, LeBlanc notes, they cannot complain when the law governing the conviction imposes a shorter sentence than that of the original charge. The governor says the White House's interest shows potential to win over more bipartisan support.
They're looking at what we did in Louisiana and trying to figure out what they can incorporate in their approach to prison reform and potentially criminal justice reform at the federal level.
Even as his 2 potential challengers for the 2019 governor's race claim otherwise. For your local election headquarters, I'm Harrison Golden.
Now, shortly after Kennedy's comments to us this week, the governor's spokesman, Richard Carbo, fired back, saying the senator's data derives only from a single district attorney. Carbo says Kennedy, quote, has never been one to let facts get in the way of a good headline and routinely manipulates information to fit his narrative. The Louisiana District Attorneys Association supported the bipartisan reforms, while both the DAs and sheriffs serve on the oversight task force. Speaking of Senator Kennedy, he and his frequent criticism of the governor has many pundits believing for some time now that he will make a run for governor next year. The U.S. Senator, a Republican, and Governor John Bel Edwards, a Democrat, often trade political shots. Kennedy has publicly criticized the governor over state taxes, the state's budget, the handling of aid for flood victims, and prison reform, just to name a few. Recently, Attorney General Jeff Landry said he's seriously considering running because no GOP candidate has stepped up yet, possibly resulting in some political pressure for those possible candidates like Kennedy who have said many times they might run.
Others have talked about running, and they said, well, you know, you need to make up your mind. My response to my friends who want to run is go run. You know, if I decide to run, I don't care who's in the race. When I ran for the Senate, I think I had 24 opponents, 2 sitting congressmen and David Duke.
And that was quite a race. Stay tuned. We have the full interview with Senator John Kennedy, who sat down with our Local 33 News morning team a few days ago. We'll hear more from him next on This Week in Louisiana Politics.
This is your local election headquarters.
Welcome back to Local 33 News Today. Obviously, as you can see, we've got a special guest joining us here at the desk this morning. We have Senator John Kennedy. Always good to have you in the studio joining us this morning. Good to have you with us. And obviously, there's a lot going on, a lot happening in Washington, obviously, that's impacting Louisiana families. But most recently, we've been covering some of the issues in terms of prison reform in Louisiana. And obviously, it's we just celebrated, or the state celebrated, the 1-year anniversary of Governor John Bel Edwards' prison reform plan. And I know that you've been a critic of that plan. Kind of tell us why.
Well, the governor calls his plan prison reform. I call it prisoner release. We just disagree. The governor thinks we have too many prisoners. I think we have too many people committing crimes. We have 35,000 prisoners. The governor is reviewing 16,000 of them to release them. He released 2,000 in November. Nobody checked them. No, there was no parole hearing, probation hearing. According to our district attorneys, anywhere from 25% to a third have already recommitted. We've had 2 murders. 2 of the guys they let out murdered somebody. One, a guy in Jefferson Parish, he had a rap sheet 51 pages long. And they let him out, and he promptly committed battery on a police officer. Now, I don't mean any disrespect, but anybody with a brain above a single-cell organism can look at a guy with a rap sheet 51 pages long and figure he's going to re-offend. I don't think the governor's going to back up. He thinks that, well, I believe in second chances, but he thinks these prisoners are, I don't know what he thinks they're in prison for. It's not for skipping Sunday school, I can assure you. Some folks in this world, I don't know why it is, but they're not sick, they're not confused, they're not mixed up. It's not a question that their mama didn't love them enough. They're just bad people, and the first role of government is to protect people.
And so staying on that topic for just really quickly before we move on to another issue, is there a middle ground to the governor's plan on wanting to get nonviolent offenders out of prison, free up that space? Is there a middle ground to the process on how this is happening other than just critiquing what's happening? Well, he has sold the program as we're just letting nonviolent people go. You know, 2 of them committed murder. I consider that violence. I don't think the governor's going to back up, unfortunately. I said 6 months ago if he's going to get somebody killed, and he did. If he's going to do this, he ought to at least get the district attorneys and the Sheriff's Association more involved. I know the governor has a task force, but he picked them. They're going to do what he says. I would go to the District Attorneys Association and the Sheriff's Association and ask each of them to nominate 5 DAs or 5 sheriffs to try to review these people before they get out of prison so somebody else doesn't get killed.
Another big topic a lot of people have been talking about are food stamps and the requirements regarding food stamps. So what are your thoughts on that? Well,
the food stamp bill is part of the what we call the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill is about $900 billion spread over 5 years. 70% of that is food stamps. What I've asked my colleagues in Washington to do is to put in a new requirement that says if you're between the ages of 18 and 59 and you're not disabled and you don't have a child under 6, then and you need food stamps, we'll happily give you food stamps, but in return, you have to work 20 hours a week. Our economy is roaring. There are jobs that can't be filled. I don't want to take away food stamps from people in need, but I do want fewer people to need food stamps, and the best way to do that is help them know the dignity of work. You know, I think it'll be a close vote. The House is on board, the President's on board. I don't know about the Senate yet.
All right.
We'll have to wait and see about that. Speaking about what's happening in the Senate, obviously you've got a Supreme Court nominee confirmation process that's going on. Is there any update in terms of that process and either confirming or not in terms of Brett Kavanaugh?
I sit on the Judiciary Committee, and we have to hold the hearings on Judge Kavanaugh. I expect we'll do that the first week of September. I like what I see so far. I met with him the other day. I've read about a quarter of his law review articles and opinions. He's whip smart. When I met with him, we didn't talk about the law. I'll save that for the confirmation hearing. We just talked. Mostly, we talked about basketball and Pete Maravich. He's a big basketball fan. We talked about his kids and how they're handling all the new scrutiny. Look, here's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a cross between Socrates and Dirty Harry. Somebody who knows what he believes and is not scared to stand up and say it. I'm not looking for an ideologue. I want a judge, not a congressman. I want him to call the balls and the strikes. I'm not looking for an activist who tries to rewrite the Constitution every other Thursday. I want somebody who will administer justice and interpret the law and not try to make it. And so far, I think Kavanaugh fits the bill, but we'll see after confirmation hearings. I sure like what I see.
Lots to look forward to from right there in our nation's capital. Right before we let you go, though, we've got to ask, Louisiana governor's race 2019, in or out?
I don't know yet.
You don't know yet?
I'm thinking very seriously about it. The last poll I saw had me at 51, Governor Edwards at 37. I think most people think the governor's led us in the wrong direction. But it's more complicated than just winning or losing. I've got to decide if I want to do it and can do a good job. Others have talked about running, and they said, well, you know, you need to make up your mind. My response to my friends who want to run is go run. You know, if I decide to run, I don't care who's in the race. When I ran for the Senate, I think I had 24 opponents, 2 sitting congressmen and David Duke. So I play against par. I don't worry about the other guy, gal.
All right, we'll just have to wait and see.
Yep.
Thanks for being with us this morning, Senator. I appreciate it.
You bet.
This is your local election headquarters.
Welcome back to This Week in Louisiana Politics on your local election headquarters. I'm joined by Pat Forbes. He is the Executive Director of the Louisiana Office of Community Development. Thanks for being here, Pat.
My pleasure, Fred. Thanks for having me.
The reason we have you on the show is we are now at the 2-year anniversary of the 2016 floods. You guys have been so busy with this because your office oversees Restore Louisiana, and that's a program that helps the victims of the flood get back on their feet with the actual funding. Give us an indication of how the victims of the floods are doing now.
Oh, sure. A lot of folks are doing a lot better. People of Louisiana are resilient. The governor said that over and over again. Vast majority of the people who, when we got to them with the program, the vast majority of them had already done a good bit of work and gotten started just with whatever funds and resources and friends and family they had. So that's been super encouraging. A lot of folks are still not back in their homes, and those are the folks we're working for every day.
Right.
I think everybody's pretty familiar with this SBA duplication of benefits issue.
That's a snag.
Yep, it is. And the governor, the congressional delegation, they have all been fighting to fix that. In essence, the law and the regulations right now tell us that we have to consider any SBA loan that was approved, whether the folks drew it or not. We have to take that as a duplication of benefits with our grant.
So they can't get the money, they can't get the
Right.
funding.
We all know a loan is not a grant, right? So there's been a lot of effort to clear that up. There's a bill that's passed the House. It's over at the Senate now. And so we're still working hard to make sure that we get some relief there for the folks who got those loans and now can't access our grants.
Now, a couple of weeks ago, you were on this program, and you guys were telling our viewers that there was a deadline, I believe it was July 20th, where they needed to fill out a survey so that they could get the help and get the funding. Can you quantify how many people signed up as a result of that outreach?
Yep, sure. We got, since we announced the deadline and did 13 different outreach meetings, tons of emails, phone calls, we got an additional 3,800 folks fill out the survey, which gets us up to about 53,700 folks who have completed the survey. So that was a big boost. It was a big effort, but it was worth it. Now we'll likely be setting a deadline for the application coming up sometime in the fall here. We'll be announcing that fairly shortly.
Do you have a number on how many people have actually received help and been given?
Yep. Nearly 14,000 families have been awarded grants. So they've got either money to reimburse them for work they had already done, or a grant coming from us to get the work done to finish up their house. So that's nearly 14,000 families across the state.
That's great, and I'm going to brag on you guys a little bit. You have here in the notes, no homeowner recovery program has cut checks to homeowners faster than Restore Louisiana. How were you able to do that?
Well, I wish I could say that it was because we were the smartest people around, but unfortunately it is mostly because Louisiana has a great deal of experience with disasters. Consequently, we have all the people in place, all the infrastructure in place to really hit the ground running when a disaster hits. We know how to write the action plan amendments. We know what the language is going to look like for the most part when they do these appropriations. And so it gives us a leg up in terms of getting the work done. But we have really hit all the marks here, honestly.
Sort of sad and reassuring at the same time. And,
yeah.
You know, this is a political show, obviously, so we have to get a little bit political before we let you go. Ronald Reagan had this quote, said the 9 most terrifying words in the English language is, I'm with the government and I'm here to help. The reason I say that is because it's hilarious, first of all. Second, a lot of people were not feeling confident about this program. How do you think they're feeling now?
Oh, I'm sure there are still people who, I mean, if you're not back in your house, Fred, and it's 2 years later, then you probably don't feel too good about the program. And unfortunately, that's the way these federally funded recovery programs roll out. Again, it's slower than we want it to be, but it's faster than it's ever been done. Right. But there are also folks, we just sent out, we were just able at the governor's request to increase our reimbursement from 50 to 100%. Right. So last week we sent out some 5,400 checks for close to $60 million to people for additional funding. Now that's money they took out of their savings account, their retirement, their kids' tuition accounts, that they'll be able to replenish those things, fix their house up more. So it's going to be a big boost for the long-term recovery, not only of those families, but of the state.
All right, well, we've run out of time. Pat Forbes, the Executive Director of the Office of Community Development, thank you so much, and good luck going forward.
Thanks, Fred.
Louisiana's gaming chief says he has Mississippi on his mind these days as our neighboring state seeks to lure more visitors. He's calling on casinos here to make improvements. He wants more hotel rooms and conference spaces using the land they're now able to occupy. Harrison Golden explains.
The head of Louisiana's Gaming Control Board says he's an eternal optimist, confident that newly loosened guidelines on riverboat casinos will spell growth for a Louisiana industry that faces more out-of-state competition than ever.
This was about building new resorts with amenities and having gambling, by the way.
Ronnie Jones is talking about rules to bring some of Louisiana's 15 riverboat casinos onto land. It wasn't until this year that state lawmakers voted to let the vessels move up to 1,200 feet inland from their designated berth space. Before that, for 27 years, casinos in the state were confined only to the water, a law Jones says had held back Louisiana gaming.
And then you have later generation properties, like the Golden Nugget in Lake Charles, and they have to have a paddle wheel. It's not going anywhere. It has a cement hull.
Jones says the Gaming Commission will be ready to let riverboats onto shore by the end of the calendar year, adding that 3 properties have already voiced interest in moving dockside. That includes the Belle of Baton Rouge and the Treasure Chest in Kenner. The owner of the third has yet to make its movement public. Jones says the control board will look at each proposed move one by one.
We're going to look at each property separately based on where it's located. There are big differences between the Lake Charles market and Amelia. I mean, those markets are incredibly different.
Moving forward, Jones says the state's casino operators have voiced concerns that Mississippi's legalization of sports betting will drive customers away from Louisiana. He expects lawmakers here to revisit the issue of sports betting in the 2019 legislative session. For your local election headquarters, I'm Harrison Golden.
Up next, we'll take a look at that blue wave you keep hearing about. Did pollsters see that Democratic wave in turnout for the 5 states that held primary elections last week? We'll have the answer.
This is your local election headquarters.
Welcome back. 5 more states held primary elections last week, and pollsters say it's more evidence of a blue wave. According to JMC Analytics and polling, partisan numbers from those races indicate a more enthusiastic Democratic electorate leading up to the midterm elections in November. Voters went to the polls on Tuesday in Ohio, Michigan, Missouri, Kansas, and Washington State, and those who vote Democrat had a notable increase in turnout. Taking a look at 23 of the 35 states that have held primaries for both parties to date, Democratic turnout has increased 81% while Republican turnout has only increased 20% relative to the 2014 primary season. Many believe these numbers spell trouble for Republicans who control both the Senate and the House. But we'll see. Midterm elections are held in November. Thank you for joining us for This Week in Louisiana Politics. I'm Fred Childers. I'll see you next Sunday right here on your local election headquarters.